You ever have that one neighbor who thinks they own the entire block? Well, I do. And her name is Karen. Not just any Karen, though. This one wears her HOA badge like it's a sheriff's star, marching around the cul-de-sac as if she's the mayor, judge, and executioner all rolled into one. It was a Saturday afternoon. The sun was out, the breeze was perfect, and I had just gotten my sound system tuned up in the garage. Not just any setup either, towering speakers, a subwoofer that could make your rib cage rattle, and a playlist full of the loudest, hardest-hitting rock and metal tracks I could find. I wasn't planning on causing trouble. All I wanted was to work on my car, sip a cold drink, and let the music blast while I turned a wrench or two. But the second those opening guitar riffs started shaking the driveway, I knew in the pit of my stomach Karen wasn't going to let this one slide. Sure enough, 5 minutes in, I heard it. That high-pitched shriek of my name echoing across the street. Excuse me. Excuse me. Here she came, storming across the road like a one-woman army, HOA violation forms practically flying out of her purse. She didn't even step onto my driveway before launching into her tirade. This is a quiet neighborhood. You can't just blast music like you're running a concert venue. People are trying to relax. Now, I'll admit I probably could have turned the volume down, but something about the way she wagged her finger in my face made me want to twist the dial the other way. So that's exactly what I did. I cranked it up. Her eyes went wide. For a second, I thought she might actually combust right there in front of my lawnmower. Instead, she pulled out her phone like it was a weapon and hissed, "Fine. If you won't listen to reason, you'll listen to the police." She jabbed 911 into her phone with so much force I thought she might crack the screen. Then she stood there, arms crossed, glaring at me while the guitar solo ripped through the neighborhood. That's when things took a turn I never expected. When the squad car finally rolled up, lights flashing and siren whooping, I figured I was about to get a hefty noise citation. But instead, the officers stepped out, listened for a moment, and then, believe it or not, started nodding their heads to the beat. This was about to get good. So there I was, leaning against my toolbox, waiting for the cops to hand me a ticket while Karen hovered beside them like she'd called in backup for a bank robbery. The first officer, a tall guy with mirrored sunglasses, paused in front of my garage. He tilted his head, listening to the music pumping out of my speakers. Then, without a word, he tapped the side of his thigh in perfect rhythm with the drums. The second officer, younger and clearly trying to keep a straight face, looked at him, then at me, then at Karen, who was practically foaming at the mouth. "Well," she barked. "Aren't you going to tell him to turn it down?" But before he could answer, the first officer said something that made my jaw nearly hit the floor. He leaned closer to the speakers, grinned, and said, "Is that Metallica?" Karen's face froze like she'd just seen a ghost. I nearly laughed out loud. "Yep," I replied. "Remastered live version. Want me to turn it up a notch?" To my absolute shock, the officer shrugged and said, "Wouldn't hurt." And with that, I twisted the dial. The bass dropped harder, the guitars screamed louder, and the younger cop, who had been fighting it, finally gave in. His head started bobbing, first just a little, then full-on head-banging like he'd been waiting all day for this. Meanwhile, Karen was losing it. She flailed her arms, yelling over the music, "This is an outrage. You're supposed to stop this, not encourage it." But the officers weren't hearing a word. They were too busy enjoying themselves. One of them even air-guitared an invisible solo, spinning around like he was on stage at a stadium show. I swear, I've never seen anyone's face turn as red as Karen's did in that moment. She tried tugging on the officer's sleeve, demanding he shut me down. "Do your job," she screamed. Finally, the older cop took off his sunglasses, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Ma'am, technically, it's the middle of the afternoon. He's not breaking any noise ordinance." Then he smirked. "And honestly, this is some pretty good music." That was the exact second Karen's jaw dropped, so wide you could have parked a car in it. She sputtered, searching for words, but nothing came out. And me? I just stood there sipping my drink, watching the impossible unfold. Not only was I off the hook, but it looked like the cops were about to turn my garage into a full-blown jam session. At this point, the whole neighborhood had started to notice. Curtains were pulling back, doors creaked open, and people stepped out onto their porches to see what all the commotion was about. They weren't just hearing my music anymore, they were seeing two uniformed officers headbanging like it was Friday night at a rock festival. One neighbor across the street actually started clapping in rhythm. Soon, another joined in. Within minutes, what began as a noise complaint had turned into a mini block party. The older officer turned back to me, grinning like a teenager. "Got anything heavier?" he asked. I couldn't believe my ears. But if they wanted heavy, I was ready to deliver. I pulled out my phone, switched the playlist, and queued up something that shook the garage floor like an earthquake. The opening riff thundered through the neighborhood, and suddenly, the second cop threw up the devil horns with both hands and shouted, "Yeah!" The crowd watching from their lawns erupted in laughter. Even kids riding bikes stopped, wide-eyed, pointing at the spectacle of two police officers rocking out in the middle of a suburban cul-de-sac. But Karen, oh, Karen, she wasn't amused. She stomped her foot so hard I thought she might split the pavement. "This is a disgrace," she hollered. "You're supposed to represent law and order, not this delinquency." The officers ignored her. They were too far gone into the music. One even grabbed my broomstick, using it as a makeshift guitar, shredding invisible strings with a grin from ear to ear. That's when the magic happened. My next-door neighbor, who owns a real guitar, disappeared into his house and came back holding his old Fender. He plugged it into a small amp he had lying around, strummed a few chords, and suddenly, this wasn't just me blasting music anymore. This was a full-on neighborhood jam. The cops cheered him on, the crowd clapped along, and I swear it felt like time stopped. For one incredible afternoon, the HOA rules, the complaints, the finger-wagging, all of it faded into nothing. Karen, however, refused to accept defeat. She whipped out her phone again, snapping pictures like she was gathering evidence for some grand trial. "This will go in my report," she shrieked. "I'll take this to the HOA board." But here's the thing. When you've got two police officers, an electric guitar, and a crowd of neighbors cheering for more, suddenly the HOA doesn't feel so powerful anymore. By now, the neighborhood looked like a scene straight out of a music festival. People had grabbed lawn chairs, kids were dancing on the sidewalk, and the garage had become the main stage. The police officers were still rocking out, the neighbor with the Fender was laying down riffs, and my speakers blasted like they were born for this moment. It was pure chaos, but the good kind. Karen, though, was in complete meltdown mode. She stomped into the middle of the street, waving her phone like it was Excalibur. "This is illegal. This is a violation of community standards," she screeched. But no one was listening anymore. Her voice was drowned out by cheers, clapping, and the thundering bass line echoing through the cul-de-sac. She turned to the officers one last time, hoping they'd finally come to their senses. "Do something. Arrest him. Shut this down." The older cop, still smiling, leaned toward her. "Ma'am, the only law I see being broken is a lack of rhythm." Then he gave her a wink and went right back to air drumming with my broomstick. The crowd erupted in laughter. Karen's face turned a shade of crimson I didn't even know was possible. She opened her mouth to argue again, but her words were completely drowned out as the younger officer shouted, "Encore." That one word sealed her fate. The neighborhood went wild, chanting, "Encore. Encore," like they were front row at a stadium concert. And me? I knew exactly what to do. I scrolled to the heaviest track I had, saved for emergencies, hit play, and let it roar through the speakers. The ground shook, the guitars screamed, and the entire street moved like a wave of energy. Even I couldn't believe it. Two cops, a neighbor on guitar, kids dancing, parents clapping, and an entire block united in music, while the HOA's fiercest enforcer stood powerless in the middle of it all. Finally, realizing she'd lost the battle, Karen let out one last frustrated screech, stomped back across the street, and slammed her door so hard the windows rattled. And just like that, she was gone. The music kept going until the sun dipped low, and the crowd slowly dispersed, smiling, laughing, and talking about how they'd never forget the day the cops started headbanging. When the officers finally headed back to their car, the older one gave me a nod and said, "Keep the volume reasonable, but hey, you've got great taste." And that was it, no ticket, no warning, just the greatest garage jam session our neighborhood had ever seen. To this day, whenever Karen passes by, she doesn't say a word. She just glares, while the rest of the block still smiles at me like we share a secret. So, what do you think? Was Karen out of line, or was I too loud? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed watching the cops head bang instead of handing me a ticket, smash that like button, subscribe for more wild HOA stories, and share this with a friend who hates Karens as much as we do.